Recently picked up this Commodore 64 on eBay. It was advertised as a nice example, all working, and it looks fairly clean from the outside. This is the picture of it that was on eBay. So I wasn't expecting to make a video on this one. This was going to be my sort of known working good state Commodore 64, and hopefully it was just a question of plugging it in and starting to get used to it and seeing what it could do. So this was me powering it up for the first time. Got a SCART connector connected to the machine at the moment, and you can't really tell looking at the screen, but every other letter is red. So for example, the O on Commodore is actually red. The 6 of the 64 is red. Well, there you go. You can just see as I go right in there, you saw the different colours. So double checking on the internet, looking at a few pictures and a few reference videos, it was quite obvious that there was something wrong with this machine. So I thought, let's open it up, let's have a look, make sure that there's nothing obvious wrong. And when I opened it up, it was nasty. You can see here, the inside of it is just covered in dust. Really quite thick dust. And then inside the actual machine as well, and I can only really liken it to when sort of cleaning a Hoover, the sort of the dust devils inside it, just how thick the dust was. It's all I'd forgotten just how bad it was. I've never seen it. I mean, I've seen some nasty things opening up some retro computers, but this stuff was just horrid. It was just absolutely caked. And usually I open up the computers and check them before I turn them on. But he seemed a fairly reputable seller. He was selling multiple C64s. So I in this case, I just didn't think there was going to be anything wrong with this machine. As I said, this was meant to be the sort of the safe bet and the known good working machine. So just started taking it apart and just having a look just how bad it was. Reading up on the actual fault itself, there was a couple of suggestions on the internet that there's a colour chip inside these things. This is my first Commodore 64 that I've took apart, so I didn't really know what I was doing. But they said there was some sort of colour chip inside it that can go bad, and replacing that can fix that fault. So I thought I'd have a look inside, see if I can try and identify where that chip was, if it was socketed or if I was going to have to socket it, and just have a look at just how dirty it actually was. You can just see on the floor there, there's another 64 that I just won recently as well, that I need to have a look at, and a VIC-20, and it's the VIC-20 that started this recently. I saw someone selling a VIC-20 on Facebook. I'd seen it for a while. It was just in a box of bits, and I'd passed it up quite a few times. Had some time at the weekend, made him an offer, and he accepted it. Never had a VIC-20 before. Ended up collecting it from this guy that sells eggs at the side of the road. He left it in the little hut that he sells his eggs from. So I went, picked up this VIC-20 in a box, put my money in the egg payment slot, and left. I never saw him. Just the amount of dust inside this thing was incredible. I really struggled to work out exactly how a device that has no fan at all on it is able to hoover up this much dust. Those dust devils inside it are just huge. So reading about this fault, I mean, how it's working, I have no idea, but it was working. It has this fault. I don't think cleaning it is going to make any difference to the fault based on what I've read. But if I'm going to keep this machine, I can't keep it in this state. It needs a clean, and it needs a good clean. So what to do? I could take it all out and brush the dust off and hoover it as best as I can, but this thing was just so thick in dust. I thought I'd get a bit more extreme, so I toying with the idea. I decided I was going to wash it. Now, I have washed boards before in the past, but it's not something I make a habit out of. But I thought I was going to wash this one. So the approach that I ended up deciding on taking was I was going to brush it down with a dry brush, get rid of as much of the dust off it as I can. I was then going to wash it in remove the socketed chips, wash it in tap water, rinse it with distilled water, rinse it in IPA, and then go over it finally with a cotton bud, and then finish it off with a cotton bud and IPA. So that's what I set out to do. I probably should have considered wearing gloves before I started this. So the next, I don't know how many minutes, is basically going to be me washing a Commodore 64. So if that sort of thing interests you, then by all means sit back and watch the show. Otherwise, skip to the end to see the final result. But as I said, started off by dry brushing it, and now just with some washing up liquid, just going over the case and getting some of that muck and dust off. The case wasn't too bad other than the inside. Now the same on the board itself, going over it with a dry brush, just trying to get as much of that dust off as I can. Removing the socketed chips, started off using a chip puller, and then one chip was a bit reluctant to come out, so I needed a bit of help with a screwdriver. Just shoved it into both ends and gently wiggled it to free that. And then yeah, looks a bit weird, but actually running it under the tap. The water shouldn't do any damage to the board at all. Obviously, as long as it's fully dried before you turn it back on again. The biggest issue that you're going to have is obviously tap water contains minerals, and it's going to leave deposits on the board. So you need to make sure that all those deposits are completely clean. Otherwise, it's going to cause you problems in the future. So this is some ionized water. So this should basically be cleaner water than what's coming out of the tap. So the theory was to use that as like a next pass, and try and get rid of some of that, and then finally go over it with IPA to get rid of anything that's left. So I tackled this by breaking the board into sections, pouring the water down, trying to get under any of the chips that were attached to the board, to make sure that the IPA actually flowed underneath it, and then using an old toothbrush, just going round and giving it a good wipe, and just getting as much of that old stuff off as I could. So breaking it down into sections, and then moving on to the next section, doing exactly the same, letting the IPA run all the way through the board, and then finishing off with a toothbrush. I also paid attention to keyboard connectors, video connectors, edge connectors, anywhere where water could have got in and been hiding. So just spent a lot of time just going through the whole board and making sure I was as thorough as possible. Then onto the bench. So now just going over with some more IPA and a cotton wool bud. Just trying to work into as many places as I can. I did find that there were little bits of dust that was clinging to legs, and just really reluctant to give up the fight to leave the board. So this is where again, just taking the time, just being really thorough, and just checking all over the board and made sure that I got every bit that I could get. Then it was onto the hot air. So I went for 100 degrees with the hot air, and on maximum fan setting, and again just taking my time, working my way through the whole board, just trying to make sure that it's completely dry. trying to force air there right under the chips to make sure that they're getting nothing just under those chips that was going to cause problems. Just take your time. Take your time, work through the whole board. I checked the underside of the board. There's some sort of nasty sticky stuff in some sections. Didn't look like any work had been done to the board, but I thought I'd get rid of the sticky stuff while I was there. So this is me just going over the board, getting rid of a bit of dirt and that tar stuff. And then the last job to do is to put the chips back into the sockets. All the chips that I removed were different sizes, so fairly easy to see where they went. Just gently bending by rocking the chip on the table, bending the legs back into place. So a little bit on the power supply. I didn't actually have a proper working power supply. I had 3 power supplies. Some of them had been purchased as working. Some of them, or most of them, people thought they were working, but obviously they weren't. Some were missing the 9V AC, some were missing the 5V DC, and some had no power at all. So I wanted to get on this weekend and make a start on the project, so this is what I came up with. I had one power supply that I know gave me 9V AC, but it had no 5V DC. So I cracked that open. There's no screws, you've got to break it open. And then inside this, Commodore in the Infinite Wisdom just cased the whole power supply in resin. I think the theory is that it made it safer, it stopped any potential fires if these things were going to go faulty. But it makes working on them impossible. So what I did here is I took the power supply, I plugged it into the mains, and that's given me my 9V AC because that was a bit that was working. I've cut the wires that go to the 5V DC, and I'm supplying the 5V DC from my bench power supply. So it's a bit of a Frankenstein power supply, but it works. It let me get on and carry on working this weekend. So time to put it back together and see where we're at. I decided not to put this cardboard shield back in place because, as I said at the start of the video, I had a feeling that this wasn't going to fix the fault. So I thought I'd be back in here. I just wanted to see, 1, have I made it any worse by cleaning it, and 2, just to confirm if that fault was still there. So for now, I'll just put it together enough to get it working and see where we're at. Okay, time to switch it on. So have I completely killed it by washing it, or is it going to be okay? There we go. So yeah, still you can't see, but it's still got the same fault, but it works. We're back to where we were, except we now have a much cleaner machine. So the keyboard is still nasty, so I think that's the next thing to do, is let's at least get the keyboard cleaned up. Different approaches to this, but based on how dirty inside the computer was, I thought we'll go all out with this and take all the keys out. So yeah, you get to see more cleaning videos. The only thing probably to mention about this is those key pullers are about £2.50 on eBay. They're a really simple design, but really effective. If you are into retro computing, it's one of those tools that you need to have. It just makes life so much easier rather than trying to prise them off with a screwdriver. So the keys are held in by a bit of friction, so a little bit of force and they'll come out, and then under each key is a spring. So take them all off, separate your keys and your springs, and then it's off to wash the keys. The only one that's a little bit different is the space bar. The space bar is held in with a couple of additional connectors and a long wire metal bar. So this just needs a little bit of force with a screwdriver, just being very careful to prise it out. Not much to see with the keys. Basically chuck them in a sink, some soapy water, and give them a scrub. The keys have discoloured over time. In the past I have retrobrighted them, but at the moment I'm still not sure how successful this project's going to be. I'm not spending too much time on cleaning the keys. So just the aim is to get rid of any sort of finger dirt and dust and just get them as clean as I can. Once the keys are dry, it's time to put them back on the keyboard. So you just reverse what you did to take them off, spring in place, and then you just push the key down over the top until it clicks into place, and then repeat lots of times. Good tip is take. I mean, there's obviously reference pictures on the internet, but take a picture of your keyboard. Generally, the sort of the standard keys are fairly easy. But if it is a keyboard that you're not familiar with, some of the other sort of special character keys and function keys can be a little bit confusing as to where they go. So a nice picture at the start just makes your life easier. And that's it for part one. So where to go from here? Power supply. I want a power supply. There are people out there on the internet that are making modern power supplies, but they're a little bit expensive. So I'm going to try and make my own. Basically, I'm going to combine two power supplies, a 9-volt AC transformer and a 5-volt DC transformer, and I'm hopefully going to try and put them into one of the existing C64 power supply blocks, so it looks fairly authentic. So that's one piece. The other bit is to obviously fix this problem with the multicoloured fonts as well. So a bit more investigation. That colour chip that I was talking about earlier doesn't exist on the 64. This is what they call a short board. The motherboard is reduced in size and the chips are more dense. They've combined a number of different chips on this board. One of those being the colour chip. So that's now in the PLA chip. It's a super PLA apparently. It's a bigger chip and it's soldered to the board. They're not that easy to find. My plan initially was to get one, socket the chip, and then put this replacement chip in that socket. But I've actually found a replacement motherboard with the chip already on there for pretty much the same price as I would have paid for with just the chip. So even after all this and going through all this work and cleaning the board, I'm probably going to end up, for now, putting a replacement motherboard in this machine that's got that chip. That doesn't mean it's the end of the road for this board. I will look out for other boards, other donor boards that have got that chip, and hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on that chip at a decent price and use this board at some point in the future. But that's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Any suggestions, improvements, comments, please leave a message. Thank you for watching.